Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 drops on September 9th, and myself, Livid, and our good buddy Tragic had the chance to go hands-on with a special preview build, and oh man, do we have a lot to talk about. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and this is our ultimate preview for Saber Interactive's upcoming action shooter, Space Marine 2. Since its reveal, Space Marine 2 has captured our attention. Not only are we massive fans of Warhammer 40k games, but we're also just big fans of this particular genre, third-person action shooters. The combat has looked incredible based on all of the trailers, but going hands-on is a completely different experience. One we'll break down and demystify for you over the next few minutes. So to start, Space Marine 2 has three distinct game modes. Campaign, which we got a small taste of during our preview, Operations, which is a replayable game mode that gives players the freedom to fight through single missions, and Eternal War, the game's PvP mode, which won't be featured in this video because we didn't have access to it. During our preview, we had access to a short portion of the campaign, as well as 2 operation maps, but more importantly, we got to experience the 6 classes available at launch, as well as the various progression systems that feed into all of it, and we'll discuss those as well. Understand that each game mode is different, and while core elements of the gameplay remain the same, there are nuances that also make them different. But to understand any of that, we first need to talk about the core gameplay itself. Whether you're in campaign mode, playing through an operation, or fighting against other players in the arena, you will always be taking control of a Space Marine. These are big, heavy super soldiers that wield large weapons and carry explosive ordnance. Don't expect that same zippy movement of a game like Call of Duty or Apex Legends, because that is not this game. In fact, the general lack of mobility is a huge part of the experience, but thanks to your heavy armor and arsenal of weapons, there's a balance that can only be achieved by taking control of one of Warhammer 40k's most iconic weapons of war. To get an understanding of the general movement, you can walk, run, dodge, and dodge roll. The game doesn't feature the ability to jump, but there are a number of operation classes that can manipulate movement in a few key ways. More on that in a bit. Now, depending on what game mode you're on will determine what weapons you have access to. If you're playing through the campaign, you will have access to what I believe is the entire pool of weapons throughout various points in the story. When you reach a major checkpoint, you'll often find weapon caches, which give you a chance to swap around your loadout. In Operations, this functions a bit differently. As I mentioned before, there are 6 classes, and each of those classes has different primary, secondary, and melee weapons available to them. In some cases, let's take the Assault for example, a class won't have access to one of those weapon slots, in this case a primary weapon. Each class also has a variety of weapons they can use, tailored to their specific playstyle. You pick from a limited pool, not the full array of weapons, which helps determine the class's identity. We'll dive into the nuances of each type of weapon during the progression part of this video, but for now, let's talk about the action. I'll admit, there's more to the Space Marine 2's combat than I was anticipating, and this is where things get really interesting. To start, you have your ranged weapons, which function as you'd expect guns to work. You pull the trigger, and they fire. What's really special here is the variety and the true-to-lore weapons like the Bolter and Heavy Bolter, which both feel fantastic to wield. There are other fan favorites like the Melter Rifle too, and each of these weapons has that heft and weightiness that makes them feel so powerful and iconic. For the first time since the first Space Marine game, these weapons feel right at home in the hands of an actual Space Marine, which hasn't always been the case in other Warhammer 40k games, often blurring the lines of 40k lore. To complement your ranged weapons are melee weapons, and as expected, these play a much larger role in the moment-to-moment combat than the trailers alluded to. These weapons have some very specific nuance. For one, they're built with cleave in mind. Some weapons are just better suited for large packs of enemies, such as the Thunder Hammer, which has a wide sweeping arc and a sizable AoE. Other weapons, like the Combat Knife, deal higher damage, but don't hit quite as many enemies at once. As you level up and unlock different variations of these melee weapons, you'll also see changes in their defensive attribute. Fencing allow you a bigger perfect parry window. Balanced weapons allow you to perfect parry, but it requires a bit more timing and skill. And block weapons don't allow for a perfect parry at all. As far as the parry mechanic is concerned, players need to look out for 2 things. First is the dreaded red alert, which has conditioned all of us, I think, to universally understand that an unparryable attack is incoming. Then there's the blue attack, which indicates a telegraphed ability is about to happen, and you can perfect parry that blow, which triggers, in most cases, an instant kill counterattack on lesser enemies. You can also parry basic enemy attacks, which results in a counterattack as well, but these are not telegraphed. Dodging is an equally important skill, one that features a nice twist in Space Marine 2. If you perfect dodge an enemy attack, you'll notice a small targeting icon appears near the enemy's head. If you tap your ranged fire button while this is active, you'll pull out your sidearm and perform a counter shot, and that won't consume any ammunition. This will kill any basic enemies and will severely damage any elites. Sometimes these even chain together, and while it doesn't always seem like a precise science, as long as you keep an eye out for that targeting icon and time your dodge or block, you'll be able to sneak in some free kills. Anytime you counter or execute an enemy, you'll regain armor, and this is essential to understanding and surviving combat. Your class will determine how much armor you have, and as you get hit, you'll lose a percentage of that armor until it's depleted and your health pool is exposed. By countering enemies, you'll regain whole bars of armor, and the sooner you wrap your head around that concept, the sooner you'll be able to push into the harder difficulties. While you're running an operation, which is really the main game mode if we're just being honest for a minute, you'll come across green boxes that you can break, sometimes revealing armor boosts. These give you an additional armor node which disappear once depleted. Throughout missions, you can also find ammunition and medical kits either in randomly placed smashable crates or at fixed points throughout each map. One variable are grenades, which you start with but can swap out based on what you find during your run. These are expendable and are not refilled when you use an ammo cache, so you have to actively search for grenades, which are often a different type, to equip. All of this is to serve the end purpose of killing your enemies. As far as the Tyranids are concerned, there are your basic enemies, Termagants and Hormagaunts, which die in a shot or two from a ranged weapon or a single melee attack. Then there are your typical warrior tier enemies, which are a bit hardier, but still relatively easy to defeat. Beyond that are specific named elites, each with a specialization that needs to be countered. For example, Lictors are stealthy, ambush-focused elites that can tear a squad of Space Marines apart if left unchecked. Then there are the shielded Zoanthropes, which hover above the ground and barrage players with various ranged attacks. These are some of the most deadly enemies on the battlefield, and if you fail to focus fire them, they will kill you. Even playing through a vertical slice of the game, I'm happy to report there are also some pretty epic boss fights awaiting players. Now, you're crazy if you think I'm going to spoil anything about them in this video, but I will say this: there are mechanics, and you do need to be mindful of them, because if you don't, then you will most likely wipe. As you might expect, the campaign has a lot of narrative built around these boss battles, while the operation bosses are all about the action and run parallel to the campaign, but again, we'll leave those as a surprise for you to discover for yourself. What I will reveal is how some of the missions play out. This was a big concern of mine before going hands-on, that Space Marine 2 would just be a mindless romp of killing Tyranids with very little in terms of objectives. Both are true in this case. On one hand, you will cut through hundreds of enemies as you fight through linear maps with randomized horde densities, enemy placement, and sometimes objective modifiers, and that's just the nature of the game. And if you go in expecting something different, you're going to be disappointed. On the other hand, there are more objective-based parts of the missions than I was anticipating. In just the 2 operation levels we had access to, our team had to search bodies for important launch codes, defend various choke points across both missions, and set bombs on key infrastructure in order to blow up and stop a Terminid advance. While not the most complicated objectives, it does break up the monotony of move here, shoot this thing, rinse and repeat. And with more missions, I have to imagine there will be more variation. Most likely the part of this video you've all been waiting for: let's talk classes. There are 6 that we had access to, and we assume will all launch with the game on September 9th. The first is the Tactical, which has access to the ability Auspex Scan. This allows the player to reveal enemies in the surrounding area, making them more vulnerable to attacks. As far as primary weapons go, they have access to the Auto Bolt Rifle, Heavy Bolt Rifle, Stalker Bolt Rifle, Bolt Carbine, Plasma Incinerator, and Melter Rifle. For secondary weapons, they have access to the Bolt Pistol. For melee weapons, they have access to the Chainsword. The second class is the Assault, which has access to the Jump Pack skill, which enables enhanced dashes and powerful jumps, opening up new combat options. This is one of the most flexible skills in the game, giving you incredible mobility and even a bit of offense with its slam ability that allows you to plummet to the ground, creating an AoE explosion, but that does come with a cost. As far as weapons go, the Assault does not have access to a primary weapon. For their secondary weapon, they can choose either the Bolt Pistol or the Heavy Bolt Pistol. For their melee options, they have access to the Chainsword, the Thunder Hammer, and the Power Fist. This is the only class that has access to the Thunder Hammer, so keep that in mind. The third available class is the Vanguard. With its unique ability, Grapnel Launcher, this allows the Vanguard to latch onto an enemy and pull the player towards them, ending with a diving kick that deals significant damage to the enemy hit. As far as weapons, the Vanguard has access to all three categories. For primary weapons, Vanguards have access to the Instigator Bolt Carbine, Oculus Bolt Carbine, and Melta Rifle. For secondary weapons, they have access to the Bolt Pistol. And for melee weapons, they have access to the Combat Knife and the Chainsword. The fourth available class is the Bulwark. This is a uniquely heavy class that carries a shield and can use the special ability Chapter Banner to call down a rally point that restores armor to allies in an area of effect. That shield isn't just for looks either. You can use it to actively block incoming attacks and even use it offensively to knock back and deal damage to enemies. The class only has access to two of the weapon categories, starting with the secondary. The Bulwark can equip the Bolt Pistol or the uniquely powerful Plasma Pistol. For melee weapons, they can wield the Chainsword, the Power Fist, and the Power Sword, the only class to currently have access to this weapon. The fifth class is the Sniper, with its unique ability Camo Cloak. This allows you to disappear for a limited period of time. Your next attack breaks you out of camo and deals additional damage to enemies. The Sniper's primary weapons are the Stalker Bolt Rifle, the Bolt Sniper Rifle, the Bolt Carbine, and the Last Fusil. For secondary weapons, the Sniper has access to the Bolt Pistol. For melee weapons, they only have access to the Combat Knife. Finally, there's the Heavy, which wields the heaviest weaponry available and features the unique ability Iron Halo, which creates a powerful barrier in an AoE, blocking all range damage. For primary weapons, the Heavy has access to one of the most unique selections of weapons, including the Heavy Bolter, Heavy Plasma Incinerator, and Multi-Melta. For secondary weapons, they can equip the Bolt Pistol and the Plasma Pistol. The Heavy cannot equip a melee weapon. We plan on going in depth with each of these classes in separate videos, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss those in your feed. We'll take a look at the various class perks and how each class performs at a higher level. When the action slows down, and believe me, it will between missions, you get to spend some time on the Battle Barge, which is your hub for all things progression between content. We're going to focus on weapon progression since that's a huge part of pushing your Space Marine into the next difficulty. That matters because the harder the difficulty, the more XP you earn, which makes leveling up your classes and weapons that much easier. To accomplish all of this, we'll head to the Armouring Hall. At the top of the screen are the 6 classes we just talked about, but there's a lot more on this screen that we need to discuss. On the left-hand side are your loadouts. You can set up to 3 loadouts per class, and that matters because during operations, you can change your loadout at special terminals mid-mission. Not only does this allow you to swap your gear, but also replenishes your ammunition. As we discussed earlier, your loadout is made up of a primary weapon, secondary weapon, and melee weapon, and we'll dive into each of those shortly. To the right are your class trials. These are introductory scenarios tailor-made for each class. Think of them like tutorials that teach you the basics of a class, but also reward you with some progression goodies if you manage to complete them quickly. Snag an A score and you'll scoop up an Armory data token, as well as some requisition. On the right side of the screen, you can see your class's level in the upper right-hand corner. Below that is your class's special ability and tooltip that gives you a quick overview of what the ability actually does. To learn more about that ability, you will want to complete your trials. Below that still is your perk tree. This is specific to your class, with one perk being unlocked every level. Perks are unlocked from left to right as if you're reading a book. Players can only select one perk per column, which is where a majority of the build crafting will come into play with this game. If we take a step back, we can really dive into weapon progression, one of the more important things you need to know about. As I mentioned before, each class has access to a different lineup of weapons, and while there are plenty of differences between the individual weapons, the way they level up is the same across all weapons in the game. At the end of every operation, and we assume a Eternal War match, you'll gain experience. That experience not only levels up your class, but also is split between all of the weapons you used during that mission. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the overall weapon experience bar, capping out somewhere between 25,000 XP and around 29,000 XP, depending on the weapon. Each time you reach a new tier, you can unlock it using the corresponding Armory data fragment that we mentioned before. Not only can you get the green tier token from trials, but also by completing operations and finding the Armory data servo skull hidden in each operation. Once you do that, you can either equip and level up a weapon or spend another Armory data token on that unlocked weapon to gain a mastery point. The mastery system feeds into the second tab, the perk tree that you see in the center of your screen. This is a very simple talent tree system that gives you the flexibility to choose some passive upgrades that help boost the overall effectiveness of a weapon. For each mastery point you have with that specific weapon, the more perks you're able to unlock. Mastery points are on a per weapon basis and not shared across weapons. I'm also happy to report that you can reset your perks at any time for no cost. For the sake of being thorough, I should also point out that as you unlock weapon versions, you also unlock them as new skins. These can be changed based on your preference in the top right-hand corner of the weapon screen. And speaking of customization, let's end there, talking about one of the best character customization systems we have seen in a Warhammer 40k game. It is a bit confusing at first, so check this out. If you go back to your armory, you'll notice Edit Armor at the bottom of the screen. Click this and you'll enter a new menu. Up top are various pre-made cosmetic sets that can be unlocked by completing operations. The more you complete, the cooler the armor sets you unlock, and this is on a per class basis. On the bottom of this first section are 4 slots for custom armor sets. Click on one of the panels and you'll be greeted by a new menu which breaks down each part of your Space Marine's armor. As we've talked about in previous videos, the game gives you almost complete control over your look, including control over each individual piece of armor through a custom rule system. This menu allows you to change the overall look and style of each piece of armor, and you can mix and match to your heart's content. Like I said, you have 4 custom slots to play around with. However, if you want to mess with the color and emblems adorning your armor, you'll need to head to the Astartes Chapters menu up top. Just like with armor sets, the top section of this menu has presets, but these are unlocked a different way. On the left side, you'll see small icons which you can toggle for different presets based on the available heraldry in the game. Now, if you click on the actual heraldry banner icon on the right side of this menu, you'll open a completely new area of customization. This is where you can unlock new colors and design elements to your pool of options. By clicking on a set of armor, you'll pull up the full breakdown of what's included in that chapter, including any emblems, colors, patterns, and armor parts. Each thing that you unlock goes into your general pool, and if we head back out, we can go to the bottom of the screen and edit our custom armor. This is where you'll truly define the visual look of your Space Marine, setting the overall pattern, colors, emblems, and rules that allow you to customize the look of individual pieces. It all takes a minute to get used to, but play around with it once the game goes live and you'll get the hang of things. As far as progression and customization goes, as I said, we only had access to a vertical slice of the game, but we got a great look at all of the systems that feed into your Space Marine. So if you do have any questions, leave us a comment and we'll do our best to get back to you. So there you have it, essentially your first and hopefully most complete look at Space Marine 2 at this point ahead of the game's launch on September 9th. Our team is incredibly grateful to Focus Entertainment for giving us the chance to play and share new information about this game. So if you appreciate videos like this that give you a look inside the game ahead of its launch, do us a solid and hit that thumbs up and let other devs know we mean business. Of course, if you're jonesing for more Space Marine 2, consider subscribing because we'll have more content coming your way at launch. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching and play on.